Good evening and welcome to our April lecture in our Understanding ADHD series. I'm Cheryl Gedzelman, and tonight we're so pleased to have Teri Bullis speak about Beyond Gentle Parenting, evidence-based practices that work for even the most challenging child. Our chapter, CHAD of Northern Virginia and DC, is one of the many chapters in the CHAD National Organization and aligns with the national mission of improving the lives of those affected by ADHD. We are a volunteer organization of trained professionals and offer support in a number of ways. In addition to offering this free monthly lecture series on the second Wednesday evening of most months, we also have support groups for parents, students, and adults. While we're all volunteers, we cover our expenses through membership dues, donations, and sponsorships, and we urge you all to be a member. Now I'm going to introduce Dr. Teri Bullis. She is a PhD level psychologist with a background as a school psychologist, teacher trainer, and board certified behavior analyst. She provides evidence-based behavior therapy to children and families in her private practice called Behavior Solutions for Children and Families. Welcome, Teri.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to start my slideshow, so pardon the side view of my face for a moment while I do that. All right, how is this? Does this look good, Cheryl, Pam?
Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, I'm really happy to be here tonight. This is my passion, talking about evidence-based parenting practices. And as y'all might have realized by the title, I might have a little bit of a bias about what are effective parenting techniques. And that is informed by many, many years of working with parents of kids who have really challenging behaviors, but also I'm a parent myself. So actually, every single strategy that I will be talking about tonight is something that I used as a parent of my own children. And I think that that might be one of the differences between my approach and some of the information that's out there about parenting. I find that there are a lot of therapists who might be new to the field and don't have a lot of information actually about real life parenting and what that's like. And they and then there are lots of people who have lots of great ideas about parenting, and they happen to be parents, but they might be parents of, easy kids. Easy kids are not the ones that I see in my practice. And so let's talk about it. If I can, let's see. There we go. So let's define gentle parenting. I have discovered, well, I don't use AI or ChatGPT or anything like that for the most part. However, I have found that finding definitions of terms is a really handy way to do that, is to use AI. So, and I think that it's a really valid way to do it because it cites the resources right there on the right-hand side when you look up these definitions. And I think that the definition AI gives us is a pretty concise, good one to describe what the gentle parenting approach is. And it is a parenting style that emphasizes empathy and respect and understanding. It's very mindful and respectful and conscious and intentional. And those are all really important qualities of being a parent, right? We want to treat our children with empathy and understanding of their feelings and, why they may be behaving in a certain way. We want to listen to their behavior and hear what they're telling us so that we can support them and meet their needs, right? We want to be respectful of them and the fact that they are people, even though they're small humans, they are humans and they are worthy of respect. And we want to have good boundaries with them. Obviously, we want to set rules. We want to enforce those rules. We want to have open communication with them about how they're feeling and what our expectations are. And we want to help reflect their feelings back to them so they can learn how to identify their own feelings. And some of the, sort of key strategies around gentle parenting that are promoted within this approach are remaining calm when you're disciplining your child or setting those boundaries and those limits. understanding why a child is behaving in a certain way, and helping them to learn to make positive choices independently. These are all really wonderful, important qualities of being a parent. Any parent would want to do these things. I aspired to doing these things, and I encourage all of the parents that I work with to also live these principles. So, gentle parenting is great stuff. I don't have anything against gentle parenting for the most part. I want to aspire to be a gentle parent, even though my children are full grown. I still want to treat them with respect and understanding, and I want all of the parents that I work with to treat their children the same way. However, there are some problems with gentle parenting approach, particularly if you happen to be the parent of a child who has some challenging behaviors. And kids with ADHD are well known to be kids who have challenging behaviors, right? They can be, and other kids can be too, but kids with ADHD are kind of known for being a bit more maybe oppositional and strong-willed and strong-minded than average kids. And some people say that they just don't respond to cause and effect kinds of circumstances. They do things that are undesirable over and over and over again, and they don't seem to learn from the consequences, and they're really impulsive, and they're very active, so they're doing lots of things that maybe we've set some boundaries around, and they like to push those boundaries. All of those things are absolutely true. There is a high correlation with challenging behavior and the diagnosis of ADHD. So it makes sense that many of the children that I see in my practice are kids who have that diagnosis. And the problem with gentle parenting is that it does not necessarily work all that well for those kids who have those kinds of challenging behaviors. And furthermore, the whole gentle parenting sort of movement as a whole is fairly derogatory towards behaviorally informed parenting strategies. And that's where I have a problem, because I'm a behavior therapist. And I'm a behavior therapist because it works. And I don't see behavior therapy or behavior management techniques as being completely antithetical to gentle parenting. I think that we can do both of those things at the same time. So that's what I want to talk about tonight. The problem with gentle parenting basically is that there may be certainly ways in which they do not honor and promote strategies that are informed by behavior theory. So let's just talk for a second about what that actually might be. So behavior theory is very essentially that people will do things when they get reinforced for them. Right? So if you do a behavior and then something you like happens, you're going to do that behavior more. And if you engage in a behavior and then something you don't like happens, you're going to be less likely to engage in that behavior. And it is actually that simple. That is behavior theory. And it has the understanding of behavior theory has resulted in a whole bunch of parenting strategies that are very effective, proven by research to be effective, but that are kind of eschewed by the gentle parenting movement because they're sort of considered, if you provide rewards or incentives, you're kind of manipulating your child into behaving, and we don't want to do that. Or if we punish them, that's a bad thing because it's coercive and it's punitive. And we don't ever want to treat our children that way because it's not respectful. Again, I disagree that appropriate discipline would be coercive or over controlling. I think that it's necessary for children to have appropriate discipline. So the deal is, I think, is that folks who are sort of promoting the gentle parenting approach and kind of really kind of sticking up their noses if behavioral approaches is that, I mean, it feels great to be able to say that we're always going to be positive with our kids and we're never going to be punitive or disciplinary in a way that's like, stop, no, you can't do that, which are all terms that I would encourage parents to sometimes use with their children, because those are clear. And sometimes children really need clarity, especially in moments when they're losing their minds because they're overwhelmed and they're having a tantrum and they're falling apart. Saying no is much more effective than saying we need to be kind, because no is very clear and we need to be kind isn't necessarily clear. It doesn't tell kids what they need to do or not to do. So gentle parenting is problematic for me because of those things, and mainly because of the fact that I work with kids who are very challenging, and I have parents coming to me all the time and they're saying, I read this book about gentle parenting or that book about, and I'm calling it gentle parenting, but there are a lot of different words and phrases used to describe this approach. And it's just not working for these parents. And these parents are feeling so guilty because they can't always be nice and they can't always be kind. And their child seems to need more limits and more consequences. But parents don't know how to do that because it's not something that is really effectively included under the paradigm of a gentle parenting approach. Another problem with the gentle parenting approach that I have, and this is actually a really big one, is that they sometimes, not always, but largely promote this idea of time in, which some of you may have heard of. Time in means that when your child is losing their stuff, that you should hold them close and co-regulate and talk with them about their feelings and try to help them calm down. There's just a myriad of things that are problematic with that approach, and we'll talk about that later after we talk a little bit more about behavior theory, so that we all can have the same sort of understanding of why I think that's not a great idea. So here are the behavior basics, and I will repeat this one more time because it's very simple, but it's so important. Behaviors that are associated with rewards, so things your child likes, will occur more often. Now, rewards doesn't mean a little trinket or candy or money. It could mean those things, but it could also mean getting, a cookie because you asked nicely, getting something that you want because you asked nicely or you engaged in appropriate behavior. Unfortunately, sometimes negative behavior can also result in those things. So if I have a tantrum, I might get a cookie. Or if I knock somebody over the head, I might be able to get the toy that I wanted that they were playing with. Behavior theory does not judge. If you engage in a behavior and you get something you like as a result, which is otherwise known as a reward, you're gonna engage in that behavior more often. Also, then conversely, if something happens that I don't like, otherwise known as maybe effective discipline in response to negative behaviors, then that behavior is going to happen less often. And that's just the way it works. I think you all, well, maybe not all of you, but I kind of resonate with this example, driving down the highway, right? And commonly I might be going a few miles an hour over the speed limit. And I see a police car, and immediately, without thinking, my foot goes on the brake of my car. And then I look at my, speedometer, and sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry, I wasn't speeding. Most of the time, like, okay, I'm just gonna tone it down a little bit. By the way, I'm not an outrageous speeder, just a little bit, but enough to be worried. The whole concept, or the whole fact that we will automatically engage in a behavior that we have in the past either gotten punished for or rewarded for, is called automaticity. And the glorious thing about automaticity is that it completely bypasses the prefrontal cortex. What we know about children is that their prefrontal cortex is not all that well developed. So they don't have things like impulse control and being able to look into the future and make an educated decision about what I should do right now, because in the future that might be better for me, delayed gratification. Those things kids don't have. And kids with ADHD especially don't have, because their brains, in respect to those kinds of cognitive abilities, are actually delayed. So we like to say that, kids with ADHD tend to be like 2/3 of the chronological age of their peers when we're talking about the development of those kinds of skills: delayed gratification, impulse control, logical reasoning of, should I do this or should I do that kind of thinking and decision making. So the fact that we know that we can have some, well-founded strategies, parenting strategies that rely on automaticity as opposed to processing, making a logical decision that this would be a better decision for me in the long run, is really glorious. And that's why the gold standard treatment for ADHD and the challenging behaviors that parents have to deal with associated with that diagnosis is behavior management or parent training. I mean, they're both the same thing, and it's all based on behavior theory. It's learning how to parent with a knowledge of behavior theory in mind. So let's use that information to inform your parenting. Let's talk about very specific strategies that have been informed by behavior theory that research has shown over and over and over again, unequivocally, to work. So behavior-specific praise, it's one of the most effective things that you can do to promote positive behavior in your child. So how do you do it? You notice when your kid is engaging in a desirable behavior. You notice the behavior verbally. I see you are sharing your toys with your sister, right? You comment on the behavior and you link it to an underlying character trait that we want to grow. We say, that's really generous of you. You're a good sharer. You're a good big brother. And emphasize their ownership of that quality. So instead of saying, I'm proud of you for being a good sharer and a good big brother, we might say, you must be proud of yourself. And what we're doing is we're linking our positive attention, our praise, with this quality that we want our kid to recognize in themselves and take ownership for. Because once your child grows that quality, starts seeing themselves as a good sharer, a good big brother, then they will act according to that self-concept. Because that's another thing that human beings do. It's a behavior theory kind of rule, but it goes beyond behavior theory, is that we will act consistently with how we see ourselves. So let's grow that. Let's grow self-concept in a positive direction by pointing out to them when they're doing the things that we really want them to recognize in themselves, and we want them to do that more. So they will do those things more often because we're paying positive attention to them, or attention, really. I mean, lots of kids don't care whether it's positive or negative. And our praise. So most kids will respond to praise. Some kids won't. That doesn't mean we shouldn't praise them. We should praise them. But it can be a little bit more tricky. And one of the secrets to that is to make sure that you're not going over the top with it and you're being very genuine. But kids who can't tolerate praise, I think that's even more reason to give them praise, because those are the kids who are hurting in terms of their self-concept. And we really need to put effort into growing it. By the way, they may be hurting, but it doesn't mean that's your fault. Some kids are just like that naturally, and they just need to be fed more in order to develop a positive self-concept. All right, special time. Another all of these are highly researched approaches. The special time is one that you'll find in lots of different places. You might even see it in some gentle parenting advice books. But it's based in behavior theory, right? So the idea is that kids are going to behave better when they have a positive, caring relationship and they feel valued and important, right? Because that's all rewarding, that's all reinforcing. And so they're going to want to do the things that get them that kind of experience with their parents. They value that time with their parents, and it makes them feel good. And so that means outside of the special time, they will behave better for you. This is a well-known, well-documented fact. Your kid who hates their teacher may be very poorly behaved with that teacher because they hate their teacher. And next year they have a teacher that they love, and all of a sudden the behavior problems that were existing last year don't appear to be evident this year because they really like their teacher. It's important. So how do you do it? You make an appointment with your kids, but for special time, make sure you write it on a calendar. This is an appointment. This is not to be taken lightly. This isn't like, maybe if we're available at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll go for a walk together. No, it's not like that. This is formally structured time. That's why we call it special time. And it's not just if you happen to have some one-on-one time that you spend with a child, you can say, yay, I did my special time. No, you did not. Special time is scheduled. It's scheduled ahead of time. It goes on the calendar. Your child can see that they mean so much to you that you wrote it down as an appointment on the calendar. Then when you get together, when special time arrives, it doesn't need to be long, 20 to 30 minutes, you're going to do whatever your child wants to do, except for things like going places and spending money or doing passive activities like watching TV, unless that TV watching is highly interactive, or you're playing like the Wii, which is very interactive. But a regular video game where there's very little interaction, we're not doing that. So explain those sort of parameters ahead of time. And then outside of that, anything your child wants to do, that's what we're doing. And we're going to spend that time giving them authentic, positive feedback on what they're contributing to the activity. We're not going to ask them how their day was and what they learned in school today. We're not going to ask them why they misbehaved yesterday. Really, questions like that are absolutely not allowed. And we're going to try to avoid any kind of disciplinary consequence, sort of conversations. If your child engages in some sort of really awful behavior during special time, you can stop special time and say, okay, we're done with special time, and now you need your consequence, and we'll do special time again the next time it's on the calendar, right? But we're really trying to avoid being directive, and we're spending our time admiring our child and having fun with them and enjoying them. All right. Also, rewards. So rewards are what behavior theory is known best for. Rewards are a reinforcement system. People like to call it bribery. I don't like to call it bribery. I think bribery is something that when you offer money to somebody to do something illegal or unethical, that's bribery. When you're trying to get your child to brush their teeth cooperatively the first time you told them to, I think that that's just important behavior that needs to happen. And if we can make it facilitate it happening more effectively, I think that we should use all the tools at our disposal. Now, notice with that one that I said brush their teeth the first time we told them, without arguing, without delay. Okay, that's really important. When I help parents develop sort of more complex overall reward systems, I would not reward kids for behaviors that they're expected to do. They're going to have to brush their teeth sooner or later. But if I have to argue and I have to ask 10 times, I don't want to give them a reward for that. And I shouldn't give them a reward for that, because then I would be rewarding bad behavior. I would be rewarding delaying brushing their teeth, right? So I'm only going to reward the positive behaviors that I want to see. Brush your teeth the first time that I tell you without arguing or delay, right? Okay, so there are a few different ways we can do reward systems. You can do a reward for sort of single behaviors that you want to increase, like pooping in the potty. So every time you poop in the potty, I'm gonna give you a Hershey kiss. Very simple, very straightforward, totally works, absolutely worth it. I would encourage you to do that if your child needs some help pooping in the potty. However, if they also have a hard time brushing their teeth the first time they're told, or getting dressed in their pajamas, or putting their shoes on when it's time to go to school, or picking up their toys when it's time to pick up their toys, and you've got a multitude of behaviors that you would like to increase compliance with, then you might want to consider an
Does it come?
overall sort of
It's
secondary.
very good. It's so good.
Can somebody mute their, I think we got that taken care of. Great. So a secondary reinforcement system, what that means is that your rewards are actually not a consumable thing. It's like money. Money is not a consumable thing, but we like it when we get it because we can use it to trade it in for some other thing that we do want later on. So for example, here's a jar for Josh, and here's some points in Josh's jar. So when Josh brushes his teeth the first time I told him without arguing or delay, I might give him one of these points. Boop. Right? And then later on, he's like, ooh, I want to use one of these points to watch a TV show for 10 minutes. And I would say, you got the points, you got the time. It's not time for bed. It's not time for dinner. Okay, I'll let you spend that point and have your 10 minutes of your show. That's how a secondary reinforcement system works. We do want to be careful not to reward behaviors that are already intrinsically motivating. We are building intrinsic motivation, hopefully, with some of the things that are on the list that we're rewarding kids for. But let's face it, brushing your teeth the first time without arguing or delay is probably not intrinsically motivating. And so we're probably not going to expect that kids are going to at any point in time like really want to do that. However, once they get into the routine of doing it, we can begin to step up the expectations. So now I'm going to expect you, now that you're 12 years old, to brush your teeth without being told. And if you don't brush your teeth, guess what? I might take one of these points out of your jar. So the secondary reinforcement system, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, can also be used as a response cost system, which means that you lose a point. That is not a commonly advocated way of using a secondary reinforcement system, and there are all kinds of reasons for that I'm not going to get into tonight. But I think it's a very valuable use for that kind of a system because it allows us to have a disciplinary strategy that's pretty small and appropriate for small behaviors, but we're not yelling and we're not shaming, and we're doing it and we're feeling like we did something, which is actually why I developed this system, because I was faced with a summer with my children because I was a school psychologist. And I was going to be home with them and they fought all the time and they drove me crazy. And I'd be like, Zach, be nice to your sister. Zoe, stop provoking your brother. And it was like falling on deaf ears, and they did not care. And I thought to myself, I need something that these children care about because obviously my voice is not what they care about. And the research bears that out. Actually, verbal admonitions do not work to change behavior. So I developed the point system, and they valued these points because it got them good things that they really wanted. Screen time was one of the big ones for my son. And I would take a point for those negative behaviors when they would, nitpick on each other and be mean to each other or disrespectful to me, or if they didn't follow a direction that I had given them. And it was very, very effective. Now, it looks a lot different today than it did back then when I first started this, because I've learned a lot. And I'm sharing some of those tips with you guys. So the second sort of thing we want to make sure of once you decide what kind of do you want a big secondary reinforcer system, or do you want just one little reward for one little behavior? The next step is to ensure that your child has the skills to do that behavior. That's important. We want to be developmentally appropriate and set expectations at a place where your kid can meet those expectations. If you want them to make their bed and you say, I'm going to give you a point for making your bed, let's make sure they know how to make their bed. Let's maybe, if we need to, take some pictures of a bed that's already made and put that up so that they know what they're doing and they know how they can get the reward that they want. And that gives them a sense of agency and control and independence, which is glorious, right? So then we want to decide on what are the rewards that you want to offer. And here are some things that are really important to remember about rewards. They're always better when they're immediate, when they're actually rewarding, like the kid actually wants them, when we have a varied menu of rewards, and sometimes we're adding new things. We need to provide those rewards, the points or the actual reward frequently enough for your child's developmental level. So if you have a secondary reinforcement system, you want to let them cash in every day. We're not going to wait until the end of the week, like an entire week of not getting a reward. That system is not going to work for very long for very many children. And it also has to be worth the effort. So the amount of effort that is required for them to do the thing that we want them to do needs to be worth the point. Those are the most important tips about rewards. Here's some examples of things you might use for rewards. So screen time, money, like a quarter, or 50 cents. Sweet treats, if you're into that. If you don't want to give your kids sweet treats, you don't have to. You don't have to give them money. You don't have to give them screen time. These are just options. A prize box, lots of kids love those. A 30-second video on your phone. If you don't want to do like screen time itself, you could do a little itsy bitsy screen time on your phone. That can be a very valuable activity for many kids. A special toy, you know, if you go to the store and your kid's like, I really want that, please, please, please. You'll be like, okay, I'll get that. And then it's going to cost you 15 points. Or outings. Outings are wonderful because they're not a consumable thing. They're an activity, but just remember, this isn't a family activity. This is just for this child. So they want to go out for ice cream. It's just that child. And you know, one parent doesn't need to be both parents. A little caveat here, you don't want to include like your time as a reward. Children should have access to their parents' time regardless of their behavior. We need to ensure that they know that we love them unconditionally, regardless of their behavior. So, you know, sometimes parents are like, well, you know, my kid really likes it when I play a board game, and I'm like, we're not doing that. Like, just play a board game with them. And then, you know, if it's a special activity like baking cookies together, and you're not going to do that very often at all, but you might do it as a reward, that might be okay. All right. So how do you implement a reward system? You have to explain it to them. It needs to be written. So if your child can't read, you need pictures, and that needs to go on the wall. So here are the ways you can earn the points or the rewards, and here are the rewards that you can trade in your points for. This is obviously if you're doing that overall secondary reinforcement system. When you're ready to implement, you have to be consistent. You have to implement it with fidelity. You have to have the rewards available right away, like before you implement this, so that you can give them the rewards that they've earned. Lots of parents, like, here are the places where they fall down. They don't post it on the wall. They forget what it is. Their kids forget what it is. They forget that it exists. They're not trading in their points for rewards because nobody's remembering to prompt them that they might want to do that. And they're sometimes getting rewards and sometimes they're not. We need to do this with a dedicated mindset. And you want to give rewards immediately. So if you're giving a secondary reinforcement system, you know, these points should be given immediately upon the behavior. And that is what promotes this automaticity. I do the behavior and I immediately get a reward that I like. So there you go. You can establish, and you probably should establish guidelines for cashing in. Like, we're not going to do sweet treats, within a half hour of dinner time, and we're not going to do screen time until all your homework is done. And it works because kids are getting, if they get rewarded for something, you're going to do that more often. I mean, that's pretty simple. However, the lovely thing is that some of those things that we want them to do have naturally occurring reinforcements. And once they experience those things, that can help keep those behaviors going. And those are things like sharing and calming yourself down without, screaming and crying, because screaming and crying often doesn't actually feel good. There are kids that screaming or crying does feel good. That's a problem. Those are the kids that I see. And so we do have to have discipline in place. Just doing a time check there, but I think we're doing pretty good with time. Effective directions. Okay, so lots of you maybe have heard of 1, 2, 3 magic. This is the appropriate way to do it and why it works. So we're going to tell your child clearly what they need to do. You need to go get your shoes on because we need to get going. Then you walk away, give them a few moments to do it, come back. And if they've done it, great. You can say, thank you for putting your shoes on the first time I asked you to. That was wonderful. If you want, you can give them a point for that. You can give them points for anything you want to when you have this kind of system. If they haven't started doing what you told them to do, you might say, I'm going to count to 3. And if you haven't started putting your shoes on by the time I get to 3, I'm going to take a point. Or if you haven't started putting your shoes on by the time I get to 3, we're going to go get in the car without your shoes on. And you'll just have to put your shoes on when we get there, right? I would recommend that you do this the second time you are checking in to see if they've followed directions. So the first time you give the direction, when you come back, if they haven't followed the direction, that's when you do 1, 2, 3 magic. Okay. Then we're going to count to 3. And if they do it, great. We're going to say thank you. Good job. If they don't do it, we're going to follow through with taking a point calmly. And then we're going to say, okay, I'm going to give you another chance to put your shoes on. If you can't put your shoes on by the time you get to 3, I'm going to take another point and I'm taking you out to the car and we'll just put your shoes on when we get there, right? The important part here is that you follow through with the consequence that you said you were going to do. You don't give second chances with 1, 2, 3 magic. Your kid has to be convinced that if you're going to count to 3, when you get to 3, you're going to do the thing that you said you were going to do. The problem with kids who have ADHD is that they get distracted a lot, and so you give them a direction and they might intend to follow the direction and off they go, but they get distracted by their Legos or their books or their toys or their sister or whatever it is. And then you're like, okay, hey, Johnny, you got to put your shoes on because we got to go. And then you're telling them again and again and again and again. And every time you tell them again to do the same thing, you're getting madder, right? Or angry. Better than madder. And not only that, but you are teaching your child not to follow your direction the first time because you're giving them this many different chances to do the thing. And what they're waiting for often is for you to get angry, which you don't really want to do, but you may have found with your child, perhaps if you have one of these more challenging children, perhaps with an ADHD diagnosis, is that your child does not respond and do the thing that you wanted them to do unless you get angry. It feels like there's like that's the only way to get them to do something is to yell at them. And I'm here to tell you that there is another way, and you don't need to yell at them. But what you really need to do is teach them that you're serious and they have to follow the direction the first time, or something that they don't like that's not yelling is going to happen. That's why this response cost element to a secondary reinforcement system is so glorious, because you don't have to yell, but you're implementing a consequence they really don't like. And that works. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about discipline. and the features of effective discipline based on behavior theory. And also then we're going to talk about timeout, because I think that that's really important and probably something that many of you are here to hear about. All right. So if we're going to use behavior theory to guide our parenting practices, we need to be thinking about what is the function of my child's behavior when they're engaging in this negative behavior? What are they trying to get? Because if they get the thing that they're trying to get, that's reinforcement. And I would like to just say that again. If they get the thing that they're trying to get by engaging in this negative behavior, the negative behavior will be reinforced. So if I throw myself on the floor because I want 3 cookies instead of 2, and I get my 3 cookies instead of 2, I am now going to be more likely to throw myself on the floor next time I want cookies. And then that might actually generalize, and I might be more likely to throw myself on the floor anytime I want something that I've been told I can't have. And that's how these bad behaviors become larger and larger and continue on past the terrible twos, is that inadvertently, sometimes just to like survive, parents have given in and given their child a thing and might have said to themselves, well, I mean, it's just 3 cookies instead of 2, right? And it's just, this one time, and I don't normally do this. So the problem is if they give in just sometimes, that might actually result in even more negative behavior. Because when you stop providing a reward consistently every single time, then negative behaviors, or the behavior designed to get the thing that they want, actually increases. And this is something that we know is true from research that we've done on behavior. So understanding the function of your child's behavior, why they're doing it, is really important, so we can try to make sure that they don't get reinforced for that negative behavior. So here's some things just to sort of think about in terms of possible functions for behavior. So I get something that I want. I get an extra cookie. I get a toy that I grabbed from somebody. I get out of doing something I don't want to do. I don't want to brush my teeth. So I fall on the floor and I start screaming, and parent understandably, sometimes you'd be like, fine, I give up, and you walk away. And maybe you decide we're going to do teeth brushing later. However, your child has now successfully delayed the thing that they didn't want to do, and that is reinforcement. Now, some children, I said a little bit earlier, that most children are reinforced by our positive attention. And then I threw in this little comment there that some kids are also reinforced by negative attention. Yeah, so that's a lot of the kids that I work with, and it's unfortunate, but it's true, and it doesn't mean they're little monsters at all. But some kids just really like to make you mad. They find that fun and rewarding, amusing, I don't know, vindicating. There's all kinds of reasons why it might feel good to make the other person mad. Maybe I'm mad, and so making you mad makes me feel better because now I know that I've made you uncomfortable. Again, doesn't mean they're monsters. It just adds a little extra monkey wrench into things, because what it means is that when you get upset, your child is actually going to be reinforced for the behavior that they're engaging in. So it's always best to hold to the principle that when we're engaging in discipline, we're going to try to stay calm. We're going to try not to give a lot of attention to the behavior. We're just going to discipline it. So we are going to do something that they don't like, but we're not going to give them a lot of attention while we're doing that. So how do you do that? And why have I now got this slide about time in? Well, here's why. Time in, which is largely promoted by the gentle parenting sort of movement, says that when your child is really upset and having a tantrum, that you should move in and provide them with comfort and co-regulation and try to help them calm themselves down. The problem with that is that Positive attention is reinforcing, especially if you're giving your child an audience, to perhaps change your mind about the thing that they don't want to accept. Right? So by making yourself available to them and talking with them about their feelings, like, I understand that you really want 3 cookies and you're really upset. You're letting them know that you are available to continue having a conversation about this. And that will likely increase the frequency or duration of that behavior. The other problem with time in is that kids need to learn how to calm themselves down by themselves. You're not always going to be there, and you shouldn't be there. This is a really important task and skill for them to learn how to do. And so if your child needs you to like hold them and rock them and talk nice to them and like sustain through all of their screaming at you and whatever, every time they get upset, they're not learning the skills to calm themselves down by themselves. And you are depriving them of that really important skill development. The gentle parenting approach also talks a lot about teaching about feelings and problem solving. And I see that you're feeling blah, blah, blah. And look, you made somebody feel blah, blah, blah. The problem with that is that when a child is out of their mind and having a meltdown and a tantrum, their brains are literally not working. They cannot learn in those situations. The amygdala is overwhelmingly ignited and nothing else is operating. Certainly not the prefrontal cortex, which is what needs to be in operation for them to like learn and understand that maybe there was a different way they could have responded to this situation that would have been better. So let's save those teaching moments for after they've calmed down, when we can give them our positive attention because now they're calm and we can say, okay, what could we have done differently? Like what could you try next time that might get you what you want without resulting in this really big incident that didn't feel good for anybody. Ignoring physical or verbal aggression is also a big no-no in the behavioral world because physical and verbal aggression in and of themselves have those natural reinforcers. Now, that I talked about earlier, but in the context of positive behaviors. So, for example, I whack someone over the head so I can get their toy, right? I am reinforced for whacking them over the head because I got the toy. Or just yelling at somebody or hitting somebody that I'm upset with and I make them upset or I hurt them, that feels good to me because I'm mad at them. Sometimes just the release of adrenaline, even just a screaming meltdown or whatever, that feels good because it's a release. Now, if we don't do something to offset that reinforcement, then that reinforcement is going to reinforce those negative tantrumy behaviors. So we have to do something to offset that, something that your child doesn't like. Now, notice I'm not talking about sort of non-aggressive tantrums and low-level problem behaviors where ignoring actually can be very effective if you're skilled at ignoring, which most people aren't. Okay, so discipline that works is immediate because we're relying on this automaticity sort of concept. So it has to immediately happen after the behavior occurs. It should be consistent and predictable because that's respectful. Kids should know that if I hit my brother, I'm going to get a timeout, and I know what timeout looks like. It's going to be done calmly, and it's done the same way every time. And I can tell somebody if they ask me what's going to happen when you hit your brother, I'm going to have to take a timeout. That's fair, right? What's not fair is being inconsistent and kids not knowing if this is the time that I'm going to get screamed at, or if this is the time dad's going to put me in a cold shower, or this is the time I'm going to be locked in my room and I won't be allowed to leave. None of those things would be things that I would recommend. The discipline that I would recommend is calmly implemented and it's consistent and it's predictable, the same thing every time. When you try all kinds of different things, that's actually really bad for kids. The discipline should also be appropriate to the crime, obviously. Small things get a small consequence, bigger things get a bigger consequence. They all have to be something your child does not like, because otherwise we can't call it discipline, right? And it has to be enforceable. So we're not going to ground your child for 2 months. That doesn't work. So don't threaten things that you're not going to enforce. If you say you're going to do it, you have to do it, because you have to convince your child that you are going to follow through. That's the only way this works. Okay, so taking kids out of a situation, that's helpful if they would like to stay there. If they want to get out of the situation and you take them out of the situation, you've now rewarded their behavior. Sometimes that's necessary because of their behavior, but I would encourage you to take them somewhere else that they also don't want to be, like the privacy of your car, where they can take a time out before you go anywhere. You can take a point, like a secondary reinforcement system. You can take away privileges or privileged items. I wouldn't do that with young children. I would only do that with, sort of middle childhood aged kids, I don't know, 7 and up, 8 and up, but not preschoolers, because they don't have the cognitive ability to understand the connection between their behavior and losing a privilege that may not be available till later anyway. Job grounding, that means you need to do some chores to make up for this bad thing that you did. And that can be effective. The research says that it is effective. However, it can be kind of tricky to tie those things to the actual behavior that happens. So making a logical connection to the problem behavior isn't always really obvious. So I'm not a huge fan of that consequence necessarily. Or grounding from all fun activities and privileges, which is a fine consequence, again, for older children, but not younger children, because it's something that requires that cognitive connection of, oh, I'm not able to go to my friend's house this Friday because last Friday I had a tantrum and I called all of my entire family bad names and threw things, right? So let's talk about timeout, because timeout is, in my opinion, the single most effective disciplinary strategy that I teach parents, and it has been life-changing. But there are some ways to do it correctly and ways not to do it. So it's widely criticized, as if any of you are people who have done some research on gentle parenting, you have probably heard timeout get a really bad rap from that information. It's hard for me to really understand what that's about, because it seems that there's been a misinterpretation of what timeout is actually and what the research says. There's some, proponents of gentle parenting say that attachment theory says you can't leave your kids alone, and timeout, you're supposed to leave your kid alone. Well, no, actually, you don't leave your child alone. That's not the point of timeout. You're not locking them in a bedroom. That is not at all what timeout is. So anyway, appropriate timeout, according to the research, does not result in any negative effects on your child, your child's future behavior, no negative effects, or your relationship with your child. And the research is super clear about that. Now, in the moment of doing the timeout, kids don't like it, so their behavior can escalate when you first start implementing timeout. That's because they don't like it. It's a good sign. They shouldn't like it. This is discipline. We don't want them to like it. So, some parents don't do timeout because they can't tolerate the idea of causing their child any distress. You might need to learn how to do that if you want to be an effective parent, because discipline requires you to do something that they don't like. And your child might be okay if you don't ever discipline them for anything. There are lots of kids who survive childhood without being disciplined, and that's fine. But most of the kids I deal with, parents are bringing them to me because they can't tolerate all of the negative behaviors and they really need a strategy. So here's one that you can use. The research is just overwhelmingly supportive of timeout as being effective for reducing problem behaviors. So much so that the American Psychological Association, the Centers for Disease Control, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all recommend timeout as a strategy. Done correctly. All right, so a little time check. We just have a few more minutes here, so that's good. We're right on time. If you're going to do timeout, I would highly recommend that you make a poster of your household rules. Now, just very quickly, and this isn't in the handouts, but household rules would be expectations like you need to be safe, you need to be respectful or kind, you need to be responsible, and you need to be cooperative, i.e. follow directions. Those are the same rules that sort of govern society for children in school, like everywhere. So it's very consistent with what your kids will have experience with when they're in school. So if you make those expectations really clear and you make a poster, because for some reason, when you put things on paper, like kids respond to that. They think, oh, must follow this, even if they can't read, but they were part of the conversation. And when you made the poster, it will remind them to follow those expectations. So in and of itself, that can be a really powerful, helpful strategy. You need to decide on a place for timeout. It needs to be fairly isolated, not a swivel chair like this, not a rocking chair, not a cushy couch, and not stairs. A plain wooden chair is best in a semi-isolated spot. You're going to post your rules about timeout. Here are the rules. No talking or screaming or yelling or whatever. And your bottom needs to stay in the seat of the chair for the duration of your timeout. And we're not going to start the time until those conditions are met. So timeout requires your child to calm themselves down. Now, people are going to ask all kinds of questions. How do I get my kid to the timeout chair? How do I make sure they stay in their timeout chair? That is an individual decision. If you have a child who is going to struggle with those things, you might want to reach out and get support from a clinician who knows how to do timeout so that they can guide you with that. But as I describe this, there are some parents who are going to say, well, I know my child's not going to stay in the timeout chair, but I think I can handle that. I think I know how to ensure that they can stay there, or I know how I'm going to get them to the chair in a safe way, in a calm way. Okay. So the standard length of timeout, I usually start at a half of the child's age. So if the child is 6 years old, we'll start at 3 minutes. And then you're going to go longer or shorter, depending upon what seems to work. I would encourage use of a visual timer. So when you set it, they can see how much time they have, and the time sort of gradually elapses and eventually goes away. And then explain timeout to your child. Make sure that they know what the rules are. You might do a little role play so that they can, sort of experience it. So that it's predictable and they know what's going to happen, and there's no big surprises here. Now, if you've never done timeout and you start doing timeout, you need to be aware that your first few timeouts could be really, really, really hard. For the kids that I work with, they usually are very hard and they last a long time. And my record is 2 hours. So see if you can beat that. We eventually, like that 2-hour one, the parent decided at the end, and they had made the choice to hold their child in the chair in an appropriate, safe way. And they settled for 10 seconds of calm. But then that rapidly improved, and over, the course of maybe 5 or 6 or a dozen timeouts, that child learned that when the parent said, you need to take a timeout, there is no hitting, child would get up and walk on their own volition to the timeout chair, sit down, wait for the timer to be turned on, and then serve their timeout. And that's, if you're doing timeout correctly, that's what it should look like. You say, there's no hitting, you need to take a timeout because that's not safe. They go to the chair, they sit, you set the timer. When the timer goes off, you say, what was the rule? They say no hitting. I'm like, okay, you need to go apologize to your brother, and then we're done. And we're not going to talk about it again, because we do not want to reflect on negative behavior unless we want to do some sort of problem solving. What could you have done differently next time? And that is a great time to have that conversation. All right. Don't talk to your kid while they're in timeout. The short timeout is actually shorthand from timeout from positive reinforcement. So that's the whole like long phrase. So we're not providing positive reinforcement. And when you talk to your child, you're letting them know that you are available for maybe negotiating the terms of this timeout, which you are not. This is what it looks like. You got to sit in the chair and you have to be quiet. And your butt needs to stay in the seat of the chair, and that's all that's going to happen. And I don't care if you cry and you say you hate me and you should just kill me, or I'm gonna kill you, or I'm gonna burn the house down, or I'm gonna poop my pants. Sorry, bud. You are sitting in that timeout chair until the timer goes off, and then you can go to the bathroom. And then you can, whatever. But we're not going to respond to those kinds of threats and those kinds of screaming. We're absolutely not providing attention at all. And that's why it works. That's why kids hate it. Because they're being deprived of your attention and your response, which seems really fabulous, in my opinion, that we are really actually doing successful ignoring when kids are in timeout. But we need that structure of timeout for us to be effective ignorers and to not provide them with all of that attention. All right. Why does it work? It works because it's boring. Kids don't like it. And if it's something they don't like, it's going to be effective discipline, right? It eliminates those sources of reinforcement. It restores safety in the home if you've given this time out because of negative behaviors related to physical aggression. And it's important to maintain safety in your home. It's important for parents to be in control of that and to ensure that everybody is safe here. And that includes being safe from verbal aggression as well as physical aggression, right? The most important thing about timeout, though, is it absolutely requires your child to calm themselves down. And the amazing thing is that every child I've ever worked with whose parents have actually done the timeout, which is most of them, by the way, every one of those children has learned how to calm themselves down. And I've had parents who said, my child absolutely cannot calm themselves down. And I've said, look, just trust me. Just try. And then they come back a week later and they're like astounded, blown away, and they cannot believe that their child had the capacity all along. But if you've noticed, like when your kids are having those meltdowns, you can see those little glimmers that they actually do have more control than they're letting on. And it's not manipulative. They're not doing that on purpose, but they do have far more capacity for calming themselves down than parents give them credit for, usually. The other great thing about timeout is it models, as a parent, you can model how to manage a really challenging situation by just staying calm in the face of big feelings, which actually is a way of co-regulating, right? I'm breathing and I'm using a calm voice and I'm keeping things slow. And as I'm doing that, there is a pull for the person with you to like join you in that level of energy. Just like when your kid is having a tantrum, there's a pull for you to join them. But let's be the adults in this situation and let's use our power of control and regulation to model how to do that and to influence them in a positive way. And it gives you a little bit of time to like separate from the situation and reset yourself so you can be a better parent. Okay, so here you go. Here's your summary. Let's apply an understanding of behavior theory to your parenting practices. Let's do special time to build relationship. Let's give behavior-specific praise to build self-concept. Let's give rewards for behaviors that we need your kids to engage in, but they're not motivated to do. Let's do 1, 2, 3 magic to increase cooperation with directions. Let's provide consistent, predictable, calm, but effective discipline that does not unintentionally reinforce negative behavior like time in might. And let's do time out to reduce negative behaviors, ensure safety, and teach self-calming skills. Just remember, your kids will behave in the way that they see themselves reflected in your eyes. So we want to pay attention to the positive, and we don't really want to give undue attention to the negative. And that's That's my talk. So gentle parenting in summary is great stuff. I want to be a gentle parent. I want you all to be gentle parents, but I also want people to understand that there's this whole cadre of behaviorally based parenting strategies that are really effective, and you may need to add that to your gentle parenting box of tricks repertoire in order to be an effective parent for some of the most challenging kids out there. Here's my information. Thank y'all for being parents. I know you're doing the best that you can, and we're never perfect, and don't expect that from yourselves. Just the fact that you're here means you're a good parent. So I'm going to open it up for questions and stop the share. And I'm going to move my camera so you're going to see things being wonky.
Hi, everyone. I am back. I'm supposed to monitor questions, and I see one so far about timeout. Can timeout be when you're ready to be kind, come and join us instead of setting a timer?
No. Because children, generally speaking, are not really very capable of assessing when they're ready to be calm. Now, when I might use that is if they haven't done anything that I would consider timeout worthy. Like you're having a bit of a meltdown and you're having big feelings, and I might say, okay, look, you need to go to your room to calm yourself down. And when you're ready, you can come back out. Like that would be a different scenario. But if you've hit your brother and I put you in timeout for that, you can't decide 3 seconds later that you're calm enough to come back and join the group. A, because you're probably not old enough to really make an accurate assessment of that. But B, because we're not fulfilling the requirements that we've tolerated something, your child has tolerated something that they really didn't like long enough to make an impression to reduce that negative behavior in the future, if they just can voluntarily come back out of it whenever they want to.
Are there any other questions? That's the only one I saw so far. If you want, you can just turn your video and microphone on and just raise your hand and ask the question.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
So while we're waiting, I just want to point out that I raised my kids before gentle parenting was a thing, and timeout was really in fashion then. And it worked absolutely perfectly for getting my older daughter to stop hitting her sister because we were so good about enforcing it every single time that she knew. And we kicked that in the butt. I mean, we got it to stop.
You
Whatever
also kicked it in the butt, but you
whatever
know.
the expression is, we got it to stop really fast. It really works if you're consistent. We weren't consistent about everything else, but we were about that. Okay,
Yeah.
then we have next comment. This has been great, thank you. And then the last comment, what about teenagers?
Yeah.
You're not going to give teenagers time out.
No.
So what comments do you have about disciplining teenagers?
Yeah, so teenagers, that's where you want to use grounding, withdrawal of privileges for a certain period of time, is really the most effective thing to do with teenagers. And I would add that if your child is a user of screens or a user of the internet, that is a really powerful and important tool that you can use that is a privilege. And I think it is very appropriate to revoke that privilege in response to really negative behaviors. So yeah, as kids get older, we kind of edge away from the timeout thing and rely more upon grounding and withdrawal of privileges.
But Terry, the thing about screens is I know it works really well for young kids. It works a lot for our parents. They give them extra screen time when they're very well behaved, and it really works. But when I had teenagers, screen time was their phone. And if I threatened to take away their phone, it was like a limb for them, and they would totally lose it. So that did not work for us. So besides grounding, do you have any other suggestions for teenagers?
Well, I think that, if they were going to lose a limb and you actually were able to take their phone as a consequence, I think that that would be a pretty powerful deterrent for future behavior. Now, you don't want to get into a physical altercation, and some of the kids that I, are my clients are apt to get into physical altercations about that. And so what I recommend to parents is that they figure out how to access the Wi-Fi and shut the Wi-Fi off of their phone remotely. So we don't have to physically grapple with it, but the phone is now only available for texting and phone calls, and you can't use it to search the internet or be on social media. So, I mean, there's probably a broader answer to that question aside from phones, but car privileges, going places, being able to do things, those are all things that you can utilize with teenagers as well.
Any other questions?
Excellent. It's because I was so thorough. That's why nobody
You
has.
were extremely thorough.
We will have the slides will be available, and this recording will be sent to people as well. So that'll be a helpful resource for folks. And I'll also put it up on my website, but we'll have it available on our website, the CHAD website. Oh, by the way, I guess I didn't say I am a member of the CHAD board as well. So people have probably seen my face here or there if you're somebody who's been to one of our lectures previously.
Thank you all for coming. This has been extremely informative. Now I want to go back in time and raise my kids again so that I can try some of these other things that I
I
didn't
do
try
too.
yet.
I mean, who doesn't? We all made mistakes. It's okay. We're not perfect.
Anyway, I hope you can all come to our next lecture, which is sometime in the middle of May on a Wednesday. And I think it has to do with screen time. So we will send you all emails. You will be informed.
Yeah, great. Thank you all for joining us.